Emma Lawson, 10 years old, vanished without a trace, and her mother, Claire Lawson, was seen crying uncontrollably on the front lawn, but behind those tears hid a secret no one could have imagined. It was an ordinary morning in the quiet suburbs, the kind where neighbors exchanged polite hellos over fences and children biked down tree-lined streets on their way to school. But on this morning, something was missing. A young girl, 10 years old, had vanished without a trace. Her absence was first noticed at school when her teacher realized she hadn't shown up for morning classes. At first, the teacher assumed she might be late or perhaps had stayed home due to a mild illness. But as the minutes turned into hours, that assumption gave way to unease. The school contacted her parents, but when the calls went unanswered, a small knot of worrying began to grow among the staff. In the neighborhood, whispers began to circulate. Parents questioned whether someone had seen the girl after she left for school. Friends said they hadn't noticed her walking to the bus stop, and the children who usually played together had no explanation for her absence. Small, everyday routines now felt broken, and the quiet streets of the suburbs seemed suddenly eerie. By the afternoon, police had been notified, and officers arrived to speak with neighbors, teachers, and family friends. Each account added pieces to a puzzle that, for now, seemed impossible to complete. Her home, a modest house with a neatly trimmed lawn, appeared normal at first glance. Curtains were drawn in the living room, and the front door was locked as if no one had been inside all day. Inside, however, the air was heavy with tension. The mother, a woman known for being openly emotional and devoted to her daughter, had begun to panic. Her cries were loud, uncontrollable, and persistent, echoing through the quiet halls of the house. To anyone who saw her outside, she seemed to embody a mother's worst nightmare, consumed by worrying and fear. Friends and neighbors offered support, some bringing food, others simply sitting with her in silent sympathy, but no comfort could soothe the depth of her visible distress. The local authorities, meanwhile, began a careful and methodical search. They visited parks, checked nearby woods, and interviewed anyone who might have seen the girl that morning. Social media became a vital tool as concerned citizens shared posts and photos, hoping for any clue that might lead to her. Flyers went up on telephone poles, in grocery stores, and along sidewalks, each one showing the girl's smiling face, her eyes wide with innocence, her hair neatly tied back. The community felt a shared responsibility, a mix of fear and hope that someone might come forward with information, anything to explain what had happened. As the day stretched into evening, the worrying deepened. The mother, exhausted and distraught, could barely speak, and yet she insisted on retracing every step her daughter might have taken. Officers observed her movements closely, noting the mixture of anguish and determination. The house, which had once seemed ordinary and peaceful, now carried the heavy weight of uncertainty. In those hours, a sense of dread settled over the neighborhood, a quiet suspicion that something was profoundly wrong. The girl's disappearance was not just a missing child case. It was the beginning of a mystery that would unravel the surface of ordinary life, revealing secrets and questions that no one had anticipated. Days passed with no sign of the young girl, and the tension in the community grew to an almost unbearable level. Each day, volunteers scoured nearby streets, parks, and empty lots, calling her name into the wind, hoping for a response that never came. The police were working tirelessly, following leads, checking surveillance cameras, and interviewing anyone who might have seen her. But with every passing hour, hope began to waver. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected tip, a call from a local resident who had noticed unusual activity at an abandoned storage facility on the outskirts of town. The tip was vague, but the authorities acted quickly, sending a team to investigate. The storage unit was tucked behind an overgrown lot, surrounded by rusting fences and piles of discarded items. The air smelled of dust and mildew, and the area carried an uneasy stillness. When the investigators opened the door to one of the units, the scene inside was immediately disturbing. Amid stacks of old furniture, boxes, and forgotten belongings, they discovered a container that appeared out of place. Its lid was tightly sealed, and the weight suggested something significant inside. When the container was opened, the horror became clear. Inside were the remains of the missing girl, carefully packed and hidden from sight. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small town, leaving residents shaken and struggling to comprehend how something so unimaginable could happen so close to home. The news spread quickly, and the initial shock soon gave way to a flurry of questions. How had the girl ended up in that container? Who could have done this, and why? The authorities cordoned off the area, taking meticulous care to gather evidence, photographing the scene, and documenting every detail. Forensic teams examined the container, looking for fingerprints, DNA, and any clue that might point to the person responsible. Each piece of evidence revealed deliberate actions, suggesting that the girl's disappearance was not a random tragedy but something planned and executed with intent. As the investigation deepened, the mother's public grief began to draw scrutiny. The woman who had appeared so distraught and helpless in the days following her daughter's disappearance now faced questions about her involvement. Detectives examined her actions during the days leading up to the discovery, comparing timelines and statements. Patterns emerged that seemed inconsistent with someone experiencing pure anguish. Phone records, travel history, and witness accounts were scrutinized, revealing a series of movements that did not match the story she had presented. The revelation of the girl's remains marked a turning point in the case. What had begun as a frantic search for a missing child now transformed into a full criminal investigation, with the focus narrowing on those closest to the victim. The small community, once united in the search for a missing girl, now grappled with the unsettling idea that the danger had not come from a stranger lurking in the shadows but from within the home itself. Fear, confusion, and disbelief settled over the town, leaving everyone questioning who they could trust and what could have led to such a tragic outcome. The discovery in the storage unit was more than just evidence. It was a chilling revelation that nothing about this case would ever feel ordinary again. As the investigation moved forward, the authorities began uncovering layers of the mother's life that had previously been hidden from view. At first, neighbors described her as a devoted parent, someone who seemed deeply attached to her daughter and involved in the community. She attended school events, volunteered at local fundraisers, and always appeared emotional and caring. But behind the closed doors of her home, the picture was far more complex. Investigators discovered a pattern of behavior that suggested instability and secrecy, a life carefully managed to appear normal while hiding deeper issues. Police obtained the mother's personal journals, filled with cryptic entries and obsessive thoughts about her daughter. Some pages revealed intense fear of losing control, while others contained disturbing reflections on punishment and obedience. Investigators also found messages sent online to anonymous contacts describing a reality that seemed disconnected from the world around her. Experts later suggested these writings indicated a form of obsessive attachment where the mother's sense of identity was tied entirely to controlling her child. These discoveries painted a portrait of a woman whose love had morphed into something dark and suffocating, a force that ultimately led to tragedy. Surveillance footage, phone records, and witness accounts began to piece together a troubling timeline. The mother had made several unusual trips in the days leading up to her daughter's disappearance. She visited storage facilities, drove to isolated locations, and behaved in ways that, in retrospect, seemed calculated and deliberate. Investigators noted that these trips coincided with the hours when the girl was unaccounted for, suggesting premeditation rather than a spontaneous act. The careful placement of the girl's remains in the container further confirmed this, indicating that someone had planned every step with precision. Authorities also spoke with friends, relatives, and neighbors who described subtle signs of the mother's controlling tendencies. Stories emerged of a child who had been increasingly restricted, monitored, and pressured to meet her mother's expectations. Small incidents that had once seemed trivial prohibitions on seeing friends, excessive questioning about daily activities, unusual punishments took on new significance. Each detail, when combined with forensic evidence, pointed to a home where fear and control had grown quietly until they exploded into tragedy. The investigation extended into the psychological aspects of the case. Experts analyzed the mother's behavior, highlighting a rare but extreme form of obsession and control, sometimes seen in individuals who struggle with severe anxiety and distorted perceptions of parental responsibility. The combination of secrecy, planning, and emotional volatility created a dangerous environment for the child, one in which escape or intervention seemed impossible. This psychological profile became a key component in understanding how a woman who appeared ordinary to the outside world could commit an act so horrifying. As the case unfolded, the community struggled to reconcile the dual images of the mother, the tearful, grieving parent, and the orchestrator of her daughter's demise. Every revelation deepened the mystery, forcing everyone to question the hidden realities that can exist behind closed doors. The story was no longer just about a missing child. It was about the fragility of appearances, the danger of obsession, and the chilling truth that tragedy can emerge from the most familiar faces, leaving shock and sorrow in its wake. The arrest came in the dead of night, under the cover of darkness, as police quietly approached the house. The mother, already under intense scrutiny, was taken into custody without incident, though her emotional display made headlines immediately. Cameras captured her sobbing uncontrollably as officers led her away, her cries echoing down the quiet streets. To the public, she appeared as the grieving parent from the early days of the investigation, yet the evidence now told a very different story. Every step of the investigation seemed to converge on her, painting a chilling picture of premeditation and secrecy. During the initial questioning, the mother maintained a composed exterior at first, offering explanations that, on the surface, seemed plausible. She claimed ignorance, suggested she had been frantic with worrying, and insisted she had done everything she could to find her daughter. But as the hours passed, inconsistencies began to emerge. Details she had provided earlier to friends and neighbors did not align with phone records, surveillance footage, or witness statements. Investigators noted contradictions about her whereabouts and movements, particularly around the time the girl was last seen. These discrepancies slowly eroded the narrative she had tried to present. Forensic evidence played a critical role in unraveling the truth. The container where the girl's remains were found showed signs of careful preparation, including cleaning, sealing, and placement in a location that required planning to access. Investigators also discovered traces of materials in the mother's home that matched the container, reinforcing the link between her and the scene. Each piece of evidence pointed to deliberate action rather than a spontaneous lapse or moment of panic. The level of planning suggested an understanding of the consequences and an attempt to control the situation entirely. Authorities also revisited the mother's digital footprint. Her phone records showed trips and communications that contradicted her version of events. Messages, deleted and later recovered, hinted at attempts to cover her tracks and manage perceptions. Experts noted that her online behavior reflected a calculated effort to maintain the image of grief while hiding culpability. Combined with witness accounts, these findings provided investigators with a clear picture of someone who had carefully orchestrated the disappearance and concealment. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors who had once sympathized with her grief now felt a mix of disbelief and betrayal. How could someone who appeared so outwardly devoted commit an act so incomprehensible? Public attention intensified as media outlets reported every detail of her arrest and the mounting evidence. People struggled to reconcile the emotional scenes they had witnessed in the days after the disappearance with the cold, deliberate actions that the investigation revealed. Inside the interrogation room, investigators pieced together the final timeline of events. It became apparent that the mother had been involved in the girl's disappearance from the beginning, with every movement, and decision aligning with the concealment and ultimate placement of the remains, the evidence left little room for doubt. The case shifted from a missing child investigation to a premeditated crime with a parent at the center, exposing a story far more disturbing than anyone in the community could have imagined. The arrest marked a turning point, bringing clarity to a terrifying mystery while leaving a lasting scar on everyone who had once trusted the image of the crying, grieving mother. The aftermath of the arrest sent ripples through the community, leaving a sense of disbelief and sorrow that lingered long after the headlines faded. Families who had once exchanged smiles at school pickups now whispered in cautious tones, haunted by the reality that someone they had trusted could commit such a heinous act. The local authorities worked tirelessly to support the investigation, but they also recognized the emotional toll on those connected to the case. Counseling services were offered to neighbors, friends, and extended family members, while community leaders organized vigils and memorials to honor the young girl's life. The grief was collective, a mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion that no simple explanation could fully resolve. The psychological analysis of the mother became a focus in both media coverage and academic circles. Experts highlighted how her obsessive behavior and distorted perception of control had escalated to a point where it became dangerous, even fatal. Reports described her actions as an extreme manifestation of attachment disorders where the need to dominate and protect crossed into destructive territory. Every detail from the meticulous way the remains were concealed to the elaborate attempts to maintain a public image of grief was examined to understand the mind behind the crime. Psychologists noted that the outward appearance of devotion can mask instability, a cautionary insight that resonated with parents and communities alike. In the courtroom, the trial drew national attention. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming amount of evidence, including digital records, forensic findings, and witness testimonies that clearly linked the mother to her daughter's disappearance and death. Each exhibit painted a picture of careful planning and concealment. Defense attempts to portray her as an overwhelmed parent crumbled under the weight of the documented timeline and the pattern of deliberate behavior. The courtroom became a stage for a tragic story that had begun in a quiet neighborhood but had expanded into a cautionary tale about appearances, control, and the hidden dangers within a home. Public reaction was intense and polarized. Some continued to struggle with the image of the crying mother they had once seen in news footage, unable to reconcile her outward sorrow with the evidence of her culpability. Others expressed relief that justice was moving forward and that the truth had been revealed. Advocacy groups used the case as a platform to highlight the importance of recognizing signs of abuse and psychological instability, emphasizing prevention and awareness in communities nationwide. Schools, social workers, and local authorities examined their own protocols to identify ways a tragedy like this could be prevented in the future. Even after the trial concluded, the story left a lasting impression. The community, once close-knit and trusting, had been forever altered. Parents became more vigilant, neighbors more observant, and the collective memory of the girl lingered as a reminder of the fragility of trust and the complexity of human behavior. The case demonstrated that appearances can be deceiving and that darkness can exist behind the most familiar faces. While justice provided some closure, the emotional wounds remained. The image of the crying mom became etched into local memory, a haunting symbol of both grief and the terrifying consequences of unchecked obsession. The tragedy served as a sobering lesson that even ordinary lives can hide extraordinary danger, leaving a town and a nation forever changed.